I think about the psychology of not taking action quite often. It's interesting to me to think about what drives someone to do or not do something. And I often find that we as individuals often create imaginary roadblocks, closed doors that limit us from growing both professionally and personally. And one of the things that excite me the most is hearing the stories of those individuals that had an idea or saw a path and regardless of their situation decided to take action and see what would happen if they pursued it. Their stories of courage and growth are something that I'm always inspired by. And in today's episode, I got to speak with Xinran Ma and dive into his journey from being a first generation immigrant to becoming a father, and even how he went from pursuing architecture to finding his way into user experience design, and how all of this has led to him finding a passion for teaching others and helping other designers in every step of their journey, but especially with adopting AI in their workflow. The conversation is one that I would call inspiring, filled with thought-provoking ideas and much more content. So, without spoiling the whole conversation, I invite you to join us today. I'm your host, Christian Pineda, and this is Christian Talks Product Design, and a huge welcome to our guest, Xinran Ma. Xinran, it's great to have you on the podcast. I hope your day hasn't been too hectic, and it's pretty interesting to hear that you're now learning chess.
I know it's funny because my kid would come up with all kinds of random rules. Like last night, she asked me to play funny chess. So basically, you make up whatever rules that you want to the extent that you can even eat your own piece. So which is like very random, and you can also put two pieces in one of the square. Totally random. And the other night I was playing with both my kids. That was even more random. So it's just like, you can imagine there's no rule. Like all the rules are defined by themselves.
Wow, is that something that you guys just kind of made up on your own, or was that something that like exists, random chess?
I don't know. I think as I told you that my older daughter learned that at school. Mm-hmm. And they're still little, like, my older one is almost 5 years old, and they don't have this kind of comprehension of like what chess really is, but that's just my intuition that she doesn't like to lose. That's why whenever we play for like, 20% of the game or 10% of the game, she was like, let's play funny chess. Like, you can eat my king, I don't mind. You can even... Yeah, those kind of stuff.
I love the creativity. It's really interesting to see that they're thinking outside of the box and saying, well, what if we do this? What if we change it up and make it kind of like this whole new game? Even introducing a 3-player game to chess, that's something. And did you become a father once you transitioned into being a product designer? I know you started off as a architect, I believe, and then you transitioned over. That was like one of the big things, you pivoting.
Yeah, that was a big thing. That was a decision that I made when my older daughter, well, she was not born at that time, but my wife was pregnant. That was one of the pivoting moment for me to decide to make this switch, because I was thinking of that for a long time.
Was there anything else that kind of contributed to it in terms of like, were you drawn to the world of technology, or was it kind of like a scenario where you saw, hey, this is a good career opportunity for the growth potential?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I was trying to, it's funny because I feel like life is a process of self-discovery. I couldn't really identify, this is the job that I want to do for the rest of my life. I wouldn't say it that way. But I can identify some things that I know myself are interested in. So back then, I knew that I always had a passion for technology. And that's why at school, although architecture is a very traditional profession, but I was exploring different ways to use digital technology to create those kind of experience. And including 3D modeling, all kinds of softwares. I was really into it. Sometimes, forgot the sense of time. I can spend probably an afternoon working on that and felt really, really great. On the other side is this kind of, I would say, very personal, very emotional human experience. Like, for example, the moment that I walk into a building, especially the masterpiece, I could immediately resonate with the spirit inside of it. So I know those two things are something that I was passionate about. And I realized that for UX or product design back then was a very good fit for me because it's a very natural combination of two things. At the same time, it was very new, so I was on the fence about it.
So I have a bit of a real estate background, more so in the sales area. I was a real estate sales agent around the same time, 2016, 2017. And what I got really familiar with was the world of real estate and architecture, especially in the world of architecture. You have to be very almost programmatic, right? You have to look at the fine details. You have to figure out how everything is kind of being put together. And it's a field that I feel works very well with like the engineering side of things. So I guess what I'm thinking is, did you ever think maybe engineering might be a better path for me versus design? Was that something that was in your mind around that time?
I was thinking of coding bootcamp for probably 15 minutes in total. In other words, I thought about that, but it was not one of my focus for several reasons. First reason was because I did choose 2 or 3 coding courses in my grad school. And so I had some basic knowledge at that point. However, that experience, at the very beginning, I thought I was doing great, compared with other classmates. I could code about things, but at the same time, I also had some miserable experience of spending a Sunday afternoon in the studio trying to debug one line of error, something like that. So I spent probably like 5 or 6 hours of time, very focused, sitting in front of the laptop, and I couldn't figure out what was the reason of the bug. So that gave me a example or signal that I might not enjoy coding in front of a laptop, and that was one of the reasons. I think the second reason, which is, I really talk about this, but I felt like for, let's say, first generation immigrants, if you came to the States for work, naturally you're on a working visa. So you're supposed to work for your full-time employers on the major.
Right.
Since my major at school was architecture, so coding was a stretch, and I didn't think that was even possible.
Interesting.
Fun fact, after some years, I started to learn more cases that they made the switch from a visa standpoint. I didn't know how they did it, but it's funny because we always have this kind of like limiting beliefs that, that route is not possible because of certain reasons. And I just wouldn't try that. So that was my belief at that time. Coding was probably a stretch. UX sounded more relevant.
Got it. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I feel like that is something that is prevalent, especially for whatever, well, I think it's across all demographics, but like when you're a first generation immigrant, and me being one as well, there's this mindset where like it's very hard to pivot, and there's constantly this idea that maybe there's doors that are closed that you can't open. At the end of the day, that it's not really true, right? I think a lot of the times we're in our heads and we kind of limit the amount of things or the amount of progress that we can make. But that's interesting. So did you end up going to General Assembly and completing the UX program, or did you go to a different boot camp?
I did not, actually. I was Googling or searching the price of General Assembly. It was quite expensive for me at the time. I learned that it must have been much more expensive from that point on. But regardless, I didn't choose that route because, I didn't believe in bootcamps at that point. So I started to build my personal projects for many months. I started with a sort of like a redesign project and then a personal project. I spent a lot of like time and effort over the weekends because during the weekdays it was impossible. Anyway, it's a long story, but definitely some lessons learned.
That's actually really interesting. So this kind of, you had this goal, you wanted to start creating a portfolio, and you pretty much taught yourself the ins and outs. Was this through just like online research? At that time, Figma wasn't even a thing. I don't believe it was. I think the big ones back then were InVision and Sketch. Was that what you started with?
Yeah, I remember the day that I downloaded Sketch. It was like, wow, that's so cool. It's so simple and intuitive compared with the architecture softwares that I was using. I was a big fan of it. I was like, oh, that's so intuitive. That reminded me of Keynote, like Mac in some ways. And I thought, well, design software can be like this, so intuitive. And everyone can, use it or start to use it after 30 minutes of watching tutorials, more or less. And it was a big thing, Sketch. It was a very popular software. And InVision as well, like there are some plugins that you can do in Sketch, but I did use InVision as well for prototyping. And at that time, I think after like a year or so, I started to see more Figma promotions on YouTube, which was very interesting because I was like, Sketch was so powerful, and I was surprised there's another software which claimed as a cloud-based tool wanted to challenge Sketch at that time.
It actually took a lot of designers, like even until recent years, like 2 years ago, that they were really kind of diehard on Sketch, thought that it was going to make a comeback, and it didn't. So I'm curious, were you one of those? Were you kind of hoping that Sketch would remain at the top, or did you adopt Figma relatively easily?
I think I'm more of the latter. And that I think ties back to my experience with those architecture softwares as well, is that I spent so much time trying to master a software, but I realized that at the end of the day, it didn't matter that much. That's why I was more of a sort of like a tool-agnostic mentality at that point. So I didn't mind, and I didn't want to spend too much time in mastering my skills. Like whatever worked, that's fine.
I feel like in UX there's a big culture around storytelling. I think if you're able to master the art of storytelling and communicating with your stakeholders, hey, this is the vision, this is why I think this, idea is the right one, and this is kind of like what's backing that up, that's huge. And to do that, you kind of do have to take that agnostic approach to the tools and really just figure out like, hey, what tools are out there that I can quickly leverage. I don't need to master them, but I just want to make sure that they're the right ones to tell the story that I want to tell my stakeholders. I am so surprised, Xinran, that you did not go into like product design for like VR or extended reality experiences. Or I don't know, has that been something that you've looked into, or have you been excited to try out?
Yeah, good question. I played with Unity 3D. It's more like a game design engine in some ways. So I thought about that, which is like real estate, real estate or VR, AR, those kind of things. And that changed when I had a phone call with a friend of mine who made the switch like a few years before me. And I remembered very clearly in that phone call, I asked her, I was trying to find jobs in those categories, like more like an extension of architecture. She was like, are you sure you still wanted to work on things that are related to architecture? I would just like run away as far as I can. And that was like a very interesting moment for me, because I was always thinking I need to leverage, like build on top of my existing assets or knowledge around architecture. But she was like, why you had to limit yourself in this category? And at that point, it was like an important moment for me, that I didn't really have to look at the immediate circle of architecture, because after all, from a UX or product design standpoint, they are relatively similar. Like the principles, the way of designing are relatively similar. And I don't have to limit myself into those kind of very niche opportunities, because like after all, at that time, like even today, AR, VR related jobs are not a lot. So yeah, so at that point I realized that I shouldn't just like narrow my focus. I can just like try to apply it broadly. And yeah, that was my thought process.
I think that's something that's one of the calling cards that I really enjoy about UX, product design, the world of technology. Even though we do focus on this like narrow sliver of optimizing the experience, figuring out what problems are out there, and then solving for those, whether it's a new feature or an enhancement, you get to dabble in different industries, right? You can go into healthcare, you can go into, aerospace, real estate. Like it's really up to someone as an individual to figure out, hey, do I want to take the leap and, extend these skills across these different industries? So that's really cool that you decided, you know what? Even though this is, a place where it might be easily to fit my skills in terms of 3D, I'm going to try out different industries. So you were going through this process. How did you end up landing your first opportunity? Like, I know you went ahead, you self-taught yourself how to put together a portfolio and looked at these tools. But what was like the step-by-step process of going out, like going through those interviews? It was 2015, 2017. So the landscape was pretty different. And I assume that now it's completely changed, right? Do you think that like what you applied then would still apply now to job seekers that are trying to get into the field?
I think the lessons still apply today. I know that the market is not exactly the same. I can see there are higher bars in many areas. For example, the pursuit of craft, the importance of visual craft. When recruiters or hiring managers are scanning over the portfolios, there are some differences, but I would say the essence and principles, ideas still apply for sure. I think they still apply. I know the market, it's actually a challenging market because of the overall economy, how saturated the space has been.
You were mentioning before, like you started off with 10 resumes and then you scaled up to like 100. Is that a strategy that you think makes sense for job seekers like today?
I can talk about different approaches. Like one approach, meaning you just send out job applications, saw a job opening on LinkedIn or somewhere else just to blindly apply. And that is one of the strategy because it doesn't require you a lot of energy and effort per job post, but you have to make a lot of applications. I think that is one strategy. It's like, just like cranking out a lot of applications within a certain amount of time.
Right.
And there are other strategy like as well, like maybe you get it on a sort of like a coffee chat with someone to learn more about either the company or other things, like a portfolio review or presentation feedback. And that is completely opposite to the previous strategy because it requires more time and effort in some ways per chat, because you have to send a message back and forth, schedule a time, make sure that the time works for both of you. Then joining the meeting, talk about it for like 30 minutes, whatever. So there's a lot of invisible time that you could have spent the same amount of time sending out 20 applications. So that's the second bucket. There are also other other categories as well, but I usually recommend a mixed approach. And for each approach, it requires you different level of energy. Like for example, sending mass application, you usually wanted to do that during the least productive time of the day, like, after, like at night, maybe after dinner when you're sleepy or tired, you can do some time, like activities like that. And when you're more productive, let's say during the mornings, I would rather spend on the high leverage activities, which is not about sending applications or networking. It's more about focus on the case study itself.
When I pivoted from real estate or like owning my agency to actual like corporate UX product design, that was in like 2020. I remember that the rule of thumb was having 3 case studies applicable so that recruiters can like see how you handle different problem solving scenarios. Do you think that that still applies today, having 3, or do you think that, somebody can go with just 1 that's really good, or more than 3?
I think 3 is a rule of thumb. It's also about, it's funny because sometimes people judge without knowing any of the context. So the moment they see your resume, they realize you only have 2 case studies. Subconsciously in their mind, they were like, just subconsciously, 95% of the portfolios that I saw had three case study, at least 3 case studies. But this person only has 2 case studies. Subconsciously, they have this kind of impression that you don't have a lot of experience. As a counterexample, I know someone who got a lot of interviews from very good companies with only 2 case studies.
Interesting.
But they are also very niched product around this kind of like machine learning or AI or certain type of SaaS. But as you can imagine, no matter what you do, there are always going to be people are just like judging things on the face, like on the face level. If you can make sure that you meet the minimum standard of 3, whatever the third one is, it could be a very simple project that you don't have to put a lot of weight on it. At least it can pass the judge
threshold. You're 100% right. Like, even if they're not judging actively, it might just be some like bias that's already inherently there because of all of the other portfolio sites that they have seen, or just what they've heard. That's absolutely great advice. The reason I was asking is because, so I know that you like at some point you decided, I want to teach others, which I find amazing, and you put out some books and you started even doing public speaking, which, by the way, huge congratulations on that. I think I just saw that you're up to like your 9th gig this year.
Yeah, exactly.
That's absolutely great. You started off in 2019, right? I saw on your website that you had done your first public speaking event, let's see, at the UX Camp NYC for visual storytelling.
That was the first time during my career transition. It was the first formal UX meetup that I attended in person. It was, I think, Midtown, New York, and a lot of people went. I think maybe they were looking for speakers on the fly, and you just basically put your name on the paper that you wanted to speak. I don't know. There's just like some type of impulse that made me that, okay, maybe I should present something. So I put down the name, which is visual storytelling. It was actually about illustration that I drew. Was nothing really about UX in reflection. But I remembered I went back home. I had basically a flash drive to put my work in a flash drive, and I went back to the conference, and it's so funny. And then the host asked me to give a brief intro of what my talk will be about, and I was literally rambling for 1 minute. The people who were interested in my topic, they would walk into that particular room, and I just pull out the presentation. I think it went well, but I just didn't know how people received it because it was not a UX related topic. But I do know that visual and storytelling are some key words that you see in this like UX world. Okay, so back to your question about like the speaking gigs. Not usually, probably almost all of them were passive. So I I don't actively seek out opportunities for speaking. It's just because I don't have time to actively seek out for speaking. And those randomly just happen to me, like someone would reach out for things.
When you're speaking about it, it seems like you're very passionate about sharing your ideas with other designers. And when I was going through your website, I noticed that there seemed to be this progression of commonalities and, you know, those UX keywords like visual storytelling. And the more recent ones have been in terms of like AI adoption, which is something that like you've made a core aspect of kind of like your online creation process. You know, looking at like your newsletter designed with AI. What made you make that switch from saying, hey, you know what, I want to create content to help other designers either get their foot in the door or progress in their early career, to more finally looking at this like emerging technology space?
If you go through my posts on LinkedIn, I think it started around that time, which is like 2019. Like, because I have posted many writings over the years, but I think it started around 2019 at that time. And I've been basically following my curiosity. And I know there are some different topics, because I probably started with career transition from architecture to UX. And it was just something that I really wanted to write. I had the motivation to write. And I had the motivation to share with others. I think that is super important, because there was a period of time in my 20s, about over 9 or 8 years, I had no motivation to write anything. I had motivation to watch YouTube videos or NBA games, but I didn't have the motivation to write, not to mention sharing in public. And at that time, there was just like a moment of motivation of writing things, talking about career transition. And I believe that the birth of my first child plays into this as well, because I was also reflecting on this, why this happened in the first place. I think by embracing a new life in this world subconsciously made me feel less important. Like, I started to realize that myself is not the most important thing. I started to shift the focus from myself to others very gradually. And that actually led to other things that I did. After that, I was talking about case study, storytelling. I was talking about storytelling, because it was one of the major pain points when I switched careers to product design. I told you earlier about people have this intrinsic bias of things. That happens to product design or UX world as well, because subconsciously, most of the good designers that people, like the hiring managers, know, they would present their work in this way. So that if you follow these templates or frameworks or similar styles. So I started to talk about that, which is also one of my pain points. And naturally, I talk about, career, talk about leadership, and then AI. Because, it's hard for me to talk about AI 10 years ago. I didn't have the awareness, But then, gradually, I just feel like, there's a lot of conversations I had with my friends in person that led me to share and explore more about AI. And also, you may find me talking about like my life journey of being an immigrant once in a while. I think all of them come together. It may come off as different topics, but to me, they're interconnected in some ways.
It resonates with me in terms of how everything is intrinsically tied together. Sometimes things might not seem like they're related at all, but there's certain aspects of, like, for example, I used to work in hospitality, right? And that taught me a lot about the customer experience in terms of like somebody's going to a restaurant, thinking about the finer details that somebody might not think about. When I switched over to UX, that was like a big thing, right? How do we make this a pleasant experience, a memorable experience in a way that somebody can't even acknowledge it, right? It's so good that it's just by default working. And I love that about your process, the fact that you're looking at, things that are challenging to you and then learning about how you can improve them and then sharing them with others. You weren't on Substack until more recently, right?
I started I started with the Substack about 4 years ago. 4 years ago. I still have that Substack newsletter actually. It was actually in private. So I wrote about my personal stories during this career transition, but I thought, it's very vulnerable. So that's why I only, send it to two people that I know, and I kept it private. And for the new one, which is designed with AI, I started about 10 months ago, like 10 months ago-ish.
By the way, and I got to interrupt here. Huge congratulations on reaching your 1,000 subscriber mark. It's very well deserved. Like, I'm following your feed quite closely, and every single time that I read an article, I'm getting some sort of value from it. So huge congrats there.
Thank you, Christian. Same to you as well. I'm always impressed by the level of productivity and consistency that, it's just like mind blowing to me, like the things that you've been doing.
I appreciate it. It hasn't been easy for me. I am not a writer by nature. So, I mean, just sticking to that goalpost of posting every Tuesday, I think has helped me learn a lot, not just about like the topics that I'm familiar with, but also just like about myself and pushing myself to explore and learn about other creators and what they're doing and how they're approaching different problems, especially with the AI space, right? Like, one of the big reasons why I personally started Christian Talks Product Design was to dive into these like emerging technologies, both in generative AI and also like extended reality, because I mean, to me, I think those are two really cool technologies that at some point they're going to intersect. And when they intersect, I don't know what that looks like yet, but it's going to be amazing. And so right now I'm just like continuously learning how is everything kind of tying into these two worlds, which is kind of, that's how I came across your profile. I saw that you were like really diving into what AI tools are out there and how can designers start using them. You even have a course on Maven, right? How long have you been running the course?
I think for about 4 months.
How has that experience been? I mean, that, and I don't know if you've taught before, like in a cohort manner, but what's that experience been like? And like, has it changed the way that you think about design or concepts in any way?
I like to teach about things, but I don't like to use the word teach. It's more like share. I feel like it's a mutual learning process for me. Regarding Maven, I really talk about this, but I think it's something very important, because I think from many people who are not using Maven or who have not taught on Maven, you may feel like, oh, this like something must be like, how would I start as a instructor on Maven, or like for a cohort-based course. I didn't feel that way. It felt so familiar to me because I personally took different courses on Maven as a student. So I think I probably started my learning experience on Maven when it just started, about 3 or 4 years ago, probably 3.5 years ago, around that time. So I think actually I joined other type of cohorts which were out of Maven, so like different other types of cohorts. So being a student, I think I got to experience the learning experience. I got to be in a cohort with other designers or other people, depending on what kind of course that is. So I think as a student, it helped me understand what kind of experience was the one that I enjoyed the most. So that's when when I teach, I know how to frame my topic and format around that. That is very important. So when I decided to teach on Maven, it was quite natural because I already seen those kind of inspirations before me when I was a student in a cohort. So for me, it's just like, using the knowledge in my head, the experience in my head, and frame my course around it.
That's a really great approach to structuring the way that you're gonna share ideas, right? Just looking inward and saying, well, I've looked at these courses, I've attended these courses with other designers or other professionals. This is what I enjoy and this is what I don't enjoy, and based on what I want to share with others, this is kind of how I'm going to frame it. It sounds like that's what you're doing, which is really great. I wanted to ask you, So, one of your big focuses, both with the newsletter and with your course, is enabling designers to use AI tools. Kind of looking back, what was the first tool that you really kind of started to play around with that's like Gen AI powered that you thought this is a complete game changer? And how has that evolved? Are you still using that tool, or have you kind of progressed, grown into other tools that are more advanced that just fit your work style better?
ChatGPT, I always say. I know everyone uses it, but I might use it differently in some ways. So not just about improved writing or writing UX copy or summarize a research report, those kind of things. So I will do all kinds of things like ideation, thinking through a challenge. I really use it as a design thinking partner in some ways. And it sounds pretty straightforward, but also there are also a lot of like learnings to it, because once you get the answer, you look at the answer, the response, and reflect on what did well, what did not well, so that you can improve next time. And I think that actually touches upon prompting, I would say. So that's that. And as I use ChatGPT more and more extensively, I started to trying to use that as a partner with other, sort of like using that as a assistant to work with other kind of AI tools, because some of the AI tools require prompts as well. So I would frame things in a certain way in ChatGPT and then feed it into other kind of AI tools.
Could you share an example of like how you've used ChatGPT to frame a prompt to then use it in a like third-party AI powered application or non-AI powered application?
Yeah, sure. I can give the example. I gave a presentation slash like a demo workshop, or I don't know how to call it, but more like a talk slash workshop type of thing at Columbia Business School a few days ago, since my memory was still fresh about that event. And one of the quick demo that I showed was so I put out UX Pilot. There are a lot of AI tools platforms out there, and I was trying to show them, the potential of like, AI powered prototyping. What could that be? So I pull out the UX Pilot website, and there is a prompt window that I think I was basically making a random sort of like a product requirement. There's a very simple description of an app, and then I show them what would happen in that AI tool, that you would get probably very generic response from that point. However, if I were to ask very specific prompts in ChatGPT to be more specific, like for example, I was trying to just come up with a random concept. So let's design a video recording app. So we're designing an app that you can do like video recording and editing. If you were to just put that prompt in the prompt window of the AI tool, then you would get probably random result depending on the tools. However, if you were to give a very specific framing in ChatGPT, and that is actually, I would say, not related to the large language model or ChatGPT itself, is more comes from the design thinking as a product designer. And that is not about AI. I try to give some more frameworks or constraints so that the AI tools can give me more specific feedback. Like, for example, different kinds of constraints. So the example that I gave at that time was, there's a bunch of constraints you can think of. For example, what kind of platform will this product be? Like in this case, Riverside, we're building a sort of like a web application. And then I would specify the unmet user needs of this app or the specific user groups that it is targeting. I'm just making that up. I can also ask it to provide specific user interface recommendations that can improve the specific user experience. So that's that. And also I can talk about only focusing on the recording flow, because I know there can be a lot of flows to this app. There are other ways I can do, but I didn't specify in that particular sharing, like other things like, what would be the business constraints or what would be the competitors in this case? What are the other potential user insights? Particular user insights, meaning this is a customer quotes from an actual user research, as opposed to a generic pain point from Perplexity.
And so are you using ChatGPT, asking ChatGPT these questions and then bringing them into UX Copilot? So I haven't really used UX Copilot. Is this something that you can directly ask UX Copilot as you're designing an interface or a user experience?
Interesting. Yeah, there are a lot of tools like that. Actually, it calls UX Pilot. There are a lot of tools like that. Essentially, you're typing in a text-based prompt, and it will generate certain type of things. And regarding the fidelity of that thing, that's a different story. Like some tools have different options that you can toggle between lo-fi and hi-fi. Some tools that can give you a whole user flows with stuff. But there's always trade-offs, right? Maybe you can create a lot of things automatically, but you have to spend a lot of time revising, which is not worth it in some way. So yeah, like for that specific tool, it's a very standard, common way that you just like type in a prompt. Sometimes it has character limit, sometimes not, and it will generate something for you.
Got it. And so do you usually go into like ChatGPT, you kind of like ask it like, hey, I want to create this. This is what I'm thinking in a like abstract way, format it so that I can then like add it to UX Copilot, and then UX Copilot creates like a more ideal version of that experience? Or do you usually just go directly to UX Copilot if you're using that tool?
I like to start with ChatGPT or Cloud, whatever you call it. I try to
What's your experience with Claude? Everybody's talking about it. I've used it once and I didn't have a great experience with it, but I'm tempted to try it again because I just keep hearing great stuff about it.
Yeah. I was on the fence of it too, because I wanted to try the pro feed, like the pro version. I wanted to test what's the best capability of it, as opposed to using the free version. I convinced myself to try it out this month. I have not used the pro version yet, which means $20 a month. But I just wanted to try it. I did try it in Perplexity, but it's a different story because it's already a fine-tuned model that is tailored for like searching, something like that. But I do have a Perplexity Pro plan, so I tested some of the. You've probably seen that article. So I set up a different type of prompts, and I know it's not an apple-to-apple comparison, but it's pretty close. You would be surprised how similar the quality, the responses were. They were pretty similar in terms of the level of details and relevance. So for Cloud, me too. I've heard great things about it recently. I've heard about great things about the latest model, and I was hoping to try it. And also, I've heard of this kind of new features which I haven't got a chance to test it out.
I'm on the same boat as you, so I will let you know as I figure things out with Claude. What's interesting is that I see it being used in tools like Cursor as like you can change which model you're using, and maybe there it's more relevant. I don't know, but I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, likewise. I will let you know as well if that's any.
So have you used any like AI tool for actually bringing prototypes to live?
Yeah, I think you were alluding to tools like V0, Cursor AI, Replit, I suppose.
I am currently like loving. I can't state how much I'm loving V0. The way that I can just create things. I created two 2D games this week, and it's only Tuesday. And now it's got its limitations, but I'm curious. Have you used? It sounds like you have used V0 and Cursor. What's your experience been like?
I have not tried Cursor. I did some research into it, but I have not tried them. I did try a few interesting things. It was not most of them were total failures. So I tried by the way, I'm not using those tools. I'm still trying to do things in the sort of old-fashioned way of just building things merely from ChatGPT. So maybe with the Figma plugin feature as well. So I was very, very into plugins for a period of time. So I tried to create my own sort of like UI generation plugin. So in other words, if I were to type in a prompt, it will generate a lo-fi wireframe based on that prompt. So that was my goal. I probably spent about like 3 or 4 hours in early mornings. It did generate something which made me happy, but it just didn't make sense. It's like so what I did was there are some references just based on my limited knowledge of like how things work. So I provided some templates of things which are made with a lo-fi wireframe. So some templates. And then I asked it to generate this based on a certain prompt that I have. And all things are stick together. So the spacing didn't work between them because they're supposed to be like auto layout. There's supposed to be spacing between them, but it was all glued together. I was quite frustrated. So it was not a success. So I wish I could, share something really fun out of it.
Interesting. Was that with V0 or was that with like a different like ChatGPT?
No, just ChatGPT, but it was a sort of a Figma plugin.
Okay.
So if you are on your laptop with the Figma app, you can there is an option from the menu that you can create a plugin. So
I see what you mean. I was curious to see like the way you build it, was it like using ChatGPT or was it using like a normal code editor?
Just normal code editor.
But you were using ChatGPT to help you write the code and then plugging that in. Very interesting. It's, my experience, I like V0. It gets me a lot of the way there. I encourage you to try it out. But there is a misconception that it's going to do all of the job for you, and it's not. I don't like the big thing with engineering, which is why it doesn't generally jive with me, is because like your early days, when you tried learning how to code and you spend all of those hours trying to fix a minor bug or like a bug that you just couldn't find the answer to, that's still there. Right? That you still have to deal with that. And, for some people, it's a great experience. For me, I need to continuously come up with ideas. So definitely a product design thing. Going back to those tools, I tried Galileo on really cool platform. And although I haven't used any of its UI for anything that I would deliver, I've found a lot of value in asking it to create an experience, giving it the criteria, and then doing that maybe 3 or 4 times. And so what that does, it allows me to get through any early stage brain fog, or I'll call it like a designer's block, because it allows me to say, okay, now I have 5 different ways that I can approach this problem. Let me see how I can start putting things together. And I think that's been a huge time saver for me, and an approach that I would share with you and those listening if you guys are using tools like UX Copilot and Galileo.
Yeah, sounds good. Just to minor correction, it's a UX Pilot.
UX Pilot. What am I saying? I feel like I've mispronounced it.
Copilot. I know it's UX Copilot.
UX Copilot.
Yeah, it's UX Pilot. No, it's so similar. I know.
UX Pilot. Oh my goodness. I've been using Microsoft's Copilot like on the daily. So that's probably just in the back of my head, just messing with me. UX Pilot. I gotta start using that plugin a little bit more.
I like the term Copilot. It feels like.
I know we're kind of getting at time, Xinran, and I wanted to ask you at some point during today's conversation, what are your plans for 2025? Do you have any big goals that you'd like to share? I know you've been working on the courses. Your newsletter is continuing to grow, which I'm continuing to root for. Is there anything else that you have in the pipeline that you're excited for?
Nothing too dramatically different from what I'm doing right now, but I do have some new specific focus on different areas. Like, for example, for newsletter, something I really wanted to do is to cultivate the sense of community. Because right now, I started to do that. Like, I invited you like a few weeks ago, Christian, for writing that newsletter, which was great. A lot of people read about it. So I started to build a kind of community. I only know certain type of knowledge, right? I think the power of a community is that we can always learn from each other. That is like super important for me because AI is still a new topic and everyone has their own explorations, learnings about it. So I would say community building and different types of ideas that are based on top of that. Like, for example, maybe invite some guests to certain type of events. And also I wanted to reach out to certain like platforms or tools to have specific benefits for the community. Like, for example, maybe the community can access to a new AI tool, promising AI tool for a few months as a sort of like exclusive benefit, something like that. So those are the ideas I was thinking of in terms of building the community of the Design with AI newsletter. I also think about, always at the back of my mind, I was thinking of publishing books, but I have no concrete plans. I do have one book around sort of like behavioral interviews. I think the draft was pretty much done, but I just didn't have the time, and I don't have the time and bandwidth to actually get it to the published phase. So it was not part of a priority. But since I published 3 books, things are just
interesting.
So very straightforward and easy for me, from editing a book all the way to publishing a book. So that's something that I might consider, depending on how much energy and time that I have in terms of publishing books for the next year.
If you do come out with a book, I'm excited to see what it's all about.
Thank you. I think that's the fascinating part of a book, because to me, it's a product. It's a mini product. It's all about trying to identify the pain points. Yeah, like the pain points and how to make a product that is useful enough for people. And then how to add it in a simple fashion, because I don't like long books, and how to distribute it, which is always a big pain point, because you can have the best product of the world, but if you don't have a distribution channel, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, there's a lot of hard work needs to be done in that area that I'm still figuring that out. Other things, I will let you know if I figure something out next month.
Definitely let me know. And hey, if you ever do, if you're trying to do like a community building thing, if you want to do a meetup, have me and your thoughts. I'd love to check it out and collaborate. But super excited for 2025. I feel like everybody's on this kind of like topic, really just thinking about what's next, what's going to happen with like Figma AI. I'm super excited to get my hands on that new feature. I don't know if you've gotten access to it yet, but yeah, I'm looking forward to following up and staying in touch. Always great speaking to you, Xinran. Next time, if you ever have a topic that you want to just chat about for an hour or whatever, feel free to reach out and we can always set another call up.
Likewise, I'm very inspired by the things you've been doing. Like, doing a podcast, that's a lot of work, like planning, editing, and I feel honored because, I can just talk, talk about 1 hour and don't have to worry about editing at all, but you have to do like all kinds of interesting stuff.
I'm using Riverside, and I hope it has been helping quite a bit. Like, I tried using Adobe Premiere for the first podcast, and I was sitting there for 3 hours and I only got through like maybe 20 minutes. Luckily, Riverside does a lot of the heavy lifting. I had some audio issues that I've sort of resolved, which I'm really happy about. But yeah, I like in case you're thinking about it, I was not prepared at first for the amount of post editing and like all of the intricacies that actually go into the podcast, especially from like going from newsletter to podcast. But I enjoy it. At the end of the day, after I have really good conversations with people that are like-minded, I get to learn about, like, for example, your background and what you're up to and what you're planning on doing. And usually, the post editing for these conversations is very minor with the help of Riverside. So yeah. And hey, just to give you the heads up, there's also going to be some shorts that come out of this. So I'll let you know when those are up.
Interesting. Thank you.